a black person
Yes.
growing up in Nova Scotia, now you talk about context, and I have to talk about context.
Yeah.
Preston or North Preston in Nova Scotia, black community, it is socioeconomically poorer community. As a black person grew up in that community, can you say something about discrimination and systematic racism?
Yes.
And when you live and grew up in that community, what do you face? What have you faced in the issue of social injustice, this systematic racism?
Yeah. So to answer that question, I got to give some context and a little bit of
Yes.
historical reference points. And so I think it's important for your viewers to understand that Nova Scotia, the Maritimes in general, but Nova Scotia in particular, has a very unique history with people of African descent. And so back in the 18th century, there was many freed slaves and also black loyalists who fought in the American Revolutionary War, who migrated to Nova Scotia. And this is before Canada is even a constitution, a country. So it predates that. So generations and generations ago. And so you have this group of freed or, emancipated or what have you, black people coming from the States to settle in Nova Scotia. And from the inception and the beginning of black people being in this province, in this region, we have faced discrimination. And so when many black loyalists came here, they were promised land for fighting in the war. And there was a significant tension of trying to gain the land that they were promised. And then also the black people suffered a lot of discrimination from local Nova Scotians. African Nova Scotians or black people ended up leaving and going to Sierra Leone because Europe was starting this new kind of freed black state. And so a lot of people didn't want to stay here and deal with the prejudice and discrimination, so they left. And so then the people at this stage started to form these communities. And what you'll see, there are historical black communities all across the province, and there's a few in PEI and New Brunswick. In Nova Scotia, they're all situated where they're on the outskirts of cities for the most part. And so they're just outside of cities. And so I'm from East Preston, and so in my area, there's East Preston, North Preston, Cherry Brook, which are their own community, but collectively we refer to it as the Preston Township. And so, even you mentioned, James, North Preston, you referenced that. And I'm from East Preston, which is just down the road, but at the same time, I still represent Preston as a whole in terms of how systemically the Nova Scotia is structured. So to speak to some of the systematic structuring is also the way in which these communities are situated. They're in the country just outside the city, and they're also segregated. And so these are all black communities. And the reason why it is that way is because the land, they were given the worst land that was available to settle on, and it had a lot of bedrock. And the assumption was that, these black people would probably never survive, and we don't have to worry about having people who are different in our province. And so over the years, African Nova Scotians have been extremely resilient as to places to avoid, to develop these communities that, I'm a descendant and a member of. There's a lot of legacy in terms of not only these communities surviving, but actually contributing significantly to Nova Scotia and to Canada as a whole, as a country. And so in terms of discrimination, so to your point, James, if anybody comes to Halifax, I would say North Preston in general is at the top of the list. So that's just some of the discriminatory assumptions. Just any immigrant. I guarantee I heard it enough that it's probably like a script that someone's going to tell you: do not go here, do not go here, do not go here.
And so even a black person, you would say the same thing.
Would I say not to go to those places?
Yeah.
It depends. So why are you going there? I would ask you, why are you going? Like, do you want to learn the culture, or are you just going to explore? Like, they're not dangerous communities. They're just the thing that makes them dangerous or perceived that way is because they're black people being around communities where they're just black people. And but they're beautiful communities,
Oh yeah.
kindest people that I've ever met. Of course, every community has challenges in terms of people who get into trouble, and there are issues in the community. I'm not denying that, but also structurally, to go back to your question too, from African Nova Scotians beginnings in Nova Scotia, they've been marginalized, literally pushed to the
Yeah.
margins, and therefore systemically have been impoverished and have had higher unemployment rates and have had less access to jobs and in the economy, and have been overrepresented in the prison system. And these kind of disparities have created kind of an oppressive reality where African Nova Scotians are behind in many ways. And I don't think that's just because Black people are lazy or we don't try. That's not the case. We came here under the pretense of discrimination and have been able to overcome that and have thriving communities where there's been a lot of great people who've come out of our communities that are doing amazing things, but also collectively have contributed significantly to Halifax. If you ever come to Halifax, there's a place called Citadel Hill, which is one of the most popular monuments that you'll see in the city. And a lot of that structure was built by Jamaican Maroons, who were people who settled, African people who settled in Nova Scotia and helped constructed this. And so there's lots of stories. Canada is known as a hockey craved country, but actually in the late 1800s there was actually a maritime colored hockey league. And so this hockey league was created by actually Black ministers, and for a way for them, Black pastors, to engage the men in the community. Started this hockey league, and it became a pretty big thing with actually some of the moves in this league, such as a slap shot, if anybody's familiar with hockey, and certain style that the goalie plays actually originated in this league that professional NHL hockey players now adopt and use. But again, you would never credit the Maritime Color Hockey League for the creation.
I know, it's the first time I ever heard about it.
And so that's the thing that unfortunately part of the story gets, for lack of a better word, whitewashed, and the contributions of other people who are not of European descent often get left out. And then some of the prejudices and assumptions about what Black people do are often negative connotations that we're poor, or we're criminal, or what have you. And so for me personally, growing up in Nova Scotia, I've had many moments where I've been blatantly discriminated against, called all kinds of ignorant and discriminatory terms. I've had challenges with the police. Growing up, I did not have a great relationship with some police officers. And when I see police coming, I don't assume safety. I assume I'm going to be profiled. And again, I think any officer can kind of dispel that by a positive interaction. But that's what triggers in me when I see the police coming. It's not, oh, I feel more secure. It's, oh, they're going to think I did something wrong. And so I've actually had a few bad encounters with police growing up, where one particular occasion I considered making a human rights complaint because I thought it was that dehumanizing and disrespectful and just straight up racist that I was close to doing that, but I didn't end up following through with it. But my point being is racism definitely systemically and subtly too. It's very subtle things that happen where people treat you a certain way, or Canadians, specifically Nova Scotians, are nice and polite, but they can also be very politely discriminatory, if that makes any sense.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. I can understand.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sure you would. And so it's a subtle kind of prejudice that exists here in Nova Scotia. We just have a hard time with difference. There's just not a lot of diversity, and also structurally, even with the First Nations people here, the province is set up in such a way that everybody's segregated from each other. So Indigenous people are segregated in their communities. Black people are segregated in their communities, and then kind of the majority filters in everything else. And so structurally, you can live segregated, and so therefore there's not exposure and interaction. And so all we have is our assumptions and prejudgments about each other, and they end up spilling over into the times that we do interact, that they become kind of the focal point of what we assume about one another, rather than actually developing genuine relationships. Because again, it is changing. Nova Scotia is becoming more diverse, which I think is a great thing. But traditionally, if you wanted to stay in your own homogeneous space, you can. I mean, if you're the majority, and you don't really have to challenge your assumptions or prejudices. And so therefore, those discriminatory assumptions are allowed to exist and not to be challenged. But I think there's change happening in Halifax, in our society, of having the conversation about difference and diversity and race, which I think is healthy and needed, and we need to honor people and honor their contributions to the province and the city that we all love and get to enjoy.
I remember my experience. I'm not Black, obviously, but I remember when I was much younger, I lived downtown. If I ever driven through Gottingen Street evening, the police will always stop me and check. They call it random check. I have my doubt if every single time it is ever called random. I can understand these kind of, you drive into a Black area in Halifax, Gottingen Street at the time. Now it is very mixed now. But at that time, it's I don't feel anything threatened. I just feel the police always stop the cars going in and out. So for this, that's a term here called driving while Black. And of course, that links to now is Black Lives Matter. Have you ever have these kind of experience?
Yeah. So again, to give another kind of historical reference point, one of the few settlements of Africans and African Americans that came and settled here. One of the few settlements that happened in the city was in a place called Africville, which more in just off the peninsula, and where we have two bridges going from Dartmouth to Halifax, and one of the bridges is called the McKay Bridge. And so right under that bridge was a historical Black community called Africville, and they were unjustly, I would even go as far as criminally displaced. Their community was bulldozed, ruined for the sake of economic development, and so they could actually build this bridge that I just referenced. And so this whole community is displaced, told they're going to be moved to a new location, which they ended up kind of more in the Uniacke, Gottingen Street area. That's kind of how that migration happened. And instead of moving trucks, the government sent garbage trucks. Probably one of the worst atrocities, I think, in Nova Scotia's history of the way we relate to one another. So anyway, so that just gives context to what you're saying about, Uniacke Square, this specific part of the city where there's heavy police presence. And for me, I definitely have experienced being profiled driving with certain people. When you're in a car with especially, it's different when you're an individual, but when you're with a group, man, there's a good chance you're going to be stopped and you're going to be deemed suspicious. And there's actually was a report that came out last year that I don't know the exact statistic, but if you were to ask any Black person, they would definitely tell you police profile them, especially while driving. That's where that term driving while Black kind of comes from. Anecdotally, would tell you that they seem to unfairly profile Black people for traffic stops, but the data and the research came out to support those anecdotes with tangible facts about the disparity between police stopping different residents based on race. And I don't have the exact number, so I'm not going to misquote you. I'll give you the name of the report in case if anybody wants to see it. But
okay.
So it became clear that we had an issue, and actually the government eventually put a moratorium on a certain practice that police use for doing street checks and stopping people because this was disproportionately affecting Black people. And so that was a thing, and then I've been one of those numbers many times where I'm driving with friends or driving by myself, and it depends, especially if you have a certain car and if you fit a certain profile that police have deemed to be suspicious, then there's a good chance that you're going to get stopped. You prepare for it, to be honest with you. That's how pervasive it is. You anticipate that's going to happen, and you kind of have to prepare yourself for it. This is what I'm saying about my dynamic and a lot of people of African descent's dynamic in Halifax is that you're preparing to be profiled, not to be, helped. So that's just some of the dynamic between police and the Black community.